Hello everyone, you're all very welcome here to Vagabond Voices for Cairde Connected, Cairde Sligo Arts Festival. We're here in the wonderful library at the Yeats building in Sligo, and I'm delighted to be here with two remarkable voices in Irish literature today, Dabiri and Karl Geary. Welcome to the west of Ireland.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karl Geary is a writer, actor and director whose first novel, Montpellier Parade, presented his brilliant literary voice to the world, and we'll be speaking with him very shortly. But first, Dabiri is an author, broadcaster, academic and frequent collaborator with the Rubber Bandits. Her book, Don't Touch My Hair, published as Twisted, The Tangled History of Black Hair Culture in the US, is a bestseller and an extraordinary work, part memoir, part socio-political analysis, and the work of an Irish woman author who is currently redefining what we think we know about the world around us. Dabiri, you are very welcome.
Thank you.
It is
a glowing endorsement.
It is a source of great pride to have an Irish woman author actively driving culture forward. Don't Touch My Hair has hit the Irish Times bestseller list, was completely sold out in the UK and Ireland, published on the 23rd of June in the US, has already affected school policy in England. Its impact is still growing. What does this impact mean to you personally? How has it affected your life? I suppose, how are you?
That's actually a deceptively difficult question to answer. You know, it can be quite difficult when you're like at the center of something to kind of like assess its impact, especially as it's kind of in the moment as well. You know, so I haven't really had a chance to necessarily like look back and reflect, but I feel, I mean, I couldn't really hope for more than the book to have a real life and concrete impact, which it appears to be doing. Like you mentioned with the school that's changed its school policies, and other schools, other kind of educators that I've been speaking with, and I guess like a concrete. I started a petition off the back of some of the stuff that was in the book, because in the UK and in the US, I'm not sure what the situation is in Ireland. I don't think it's actually like enforced to the same degree, but in the UK at least, there's a big issue with Black and mixed Black children being excluded from schools for natural hair. And I mean, like, my book is actually, there's sections of it that are quite esoteric and that are quite unexpected, I think. So the fact that I was able to express all of that stuff, but also kind of use material, other types of material from the book to contribute to kind of more concrete activism makes me happy, is good. I'm also going to open the window. Sorry, I'm really hot. I've just realized. I'm back. So yeah. I'm also, actually, this was interesting. I had somebody that's involved in the curriculum for teaching history in secondary schools in the UK get in touch with me, because they were really interested in some ideas that I present in the book about how history and the past, the idea about how the past is constructed, is actually like very different from a more Afrocentric viewpoint than the way the discipline of history as a subject is understood from a Eurocentric viewpoint. And it was a part of the book that I was actually advised to take out by various people, because I was just told it was like it was a bit too academic. It was like a little bit too dense, but I persevered and kept it in. And so it's remarkable for me that some people have like picked up specifically on that part and said that it's making them kind of reassess how history is taught and what kind of alternative methods could be used for teaching, for studying the past.
And this is, I mean, in addition to the huge cultural impact, it's also beautifully written. It's a beautifully written work. You combine memoir and cultural analysis just with an extraordinary elegance. It draws the reader along, and I'm fascinated by the process of artists. I've been asking all the vagabonds all week about their process. Can you describe for us the process of writing this book?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for asking me that question, because I feel often when you're a Black author or somebody that is dealing with issues pertaining to race or racism, nobody ever really actually asks you anything about the craft of writing or about the writing process. They just very much tend to focus on like the issue of racism itself. And so it's like you sit in this weird space that seems kind of othered often from other writers. But with that being said, I think my process is probably going to be like a little bit disappointing in that it was literally snatched time where I could find it when I have 2 children now, but when I was writing it, as before my second son was born. But it was really just kind of like working around him, and I was working like full time while I was writing it. So there was no kind of like escaping to somewhere kind of beautiful and peaceful to work on it. It was very much just when I could find the time around all of the other stuff that I was doing. So it also, because of the amount of research I did, it took me like 2 years to write it. It was supposed to come out a lot earlier than it did. I had a year, and like, yeah, it took 2. So yeah.
Well, yes, as you mentioned right at the beginning of the book, that essentially you're sort of writing it since you were 8 years old. And I know that Dublin, Ireland and Dublin in particular, are never far from your mind. I saw that beautiful clip of you reciting Phil Lynott.
Oh, yeah.
Could you talk to us a little bit? I know you refer to it in the book, but could you talk to us a little bit about your upbringing in Dublin, how it shaped your work, and perhaps the differences that you see now when you come back?
Yeah, okay. So I would say, so yeah, I'm writing this book about race and about Blackness, but it's very much, but I'm Irish and an Irish writer, so it's very much like informed by my perspective, which is very much informed by being from, like, born and raised in Dublin. When I was growing up, my race was something that seemed to be like a constant source of. It was just something that was constant. It was like people couldn't seem to get over it, you know? So it was something that I wasn't allowed not think about kind of all the time. And I've had a lot of people say to me that I was the first Black person that they ever met. So for those people, meeting me or meeting a Black person is like a first, but I'm a person this is happening to, you know, regularly. And there were very, very few Black people or people of color in Ireland at that time. But I always think it's interesting that even though there was a physical absence of Black people, very negative notions and ideas about Blackness still loomed large in people's imaginations. You know, there was a very fixed kind of set of understanding about Blackness, but I guess people didn't really have the opportunity to like practice their beliefs because there wasn't really anybody there to practice on. Cue me. So I just felt like the weight of all that on me. It was quite suffocating in many ways. So what was the question? How did Ireland inform me? So yeah, I wanted to leave because I wanted to be somewhere where my, I thought about other countries that were no less racist and actually far more kind of institutionally and historically histories of racism kind of like at the in the DNA of those countries' identities, but those countries still seemed appealing to me because there were other Black people there, because I wouldn't be like the only one. I'd have like kind of community, and that was what was really appealing to me. So I really wanted to leave. I wanted to go back to the States where I had spent like the first 4 years. Even though I was born in Dublin, I moved to Atlanta pretty much straight away. So I really wanted to go back there. But I was determined that as soon as I finished school, I would leave, which is what I did. And I came to the UK instead to study African studies at SOAS. And yeah. But that was interesting. That was coming to the UK was when I really, really realized like how Irish I was, because there were so many things that just like my sensibilities and my worldview and my humor and like just so many things about me, living in the UK, I was like, oh, these things are very distinctly Irish. But then that was kind of like a head fuck as well, because people here couldn't like get their heads around me being Irish, So there was this kind of like erasure. I've been on things sometimes I've been in situations in the UK where there's like a group of people and there's like another Irish person, there's like a white Irish person, and they'll be like, oh, we're joined by this Irish person, and they'll introduce that person and Emma Dabiri, and I'm like, oh, I'm actually also Irish. But it's like people can't really like shift into, I think they're getting it now, but like it's not something that seems to be like easily understandable to a lot of people.
Emma, I know you have some readings ready for us today, so your first reading in your own time.
Yeah, so this chapter is one that looks, chapter was one of the most revealing to me, and the subject matter that I knew the least about. But it's about calculating and indigenous mathematical, African mathematical systems that we really very rarely hear anything about, and how some of this some of these systems are expressed through braiding patterns. But the section that I'm going to read is about mapping and the way in which enslaved Africans in Colombia used patterns braided into their hair as part of an intelligence network that they used to help escape to freedom. So, okay. Braiding is an embodied display of what the photographer Bill Gaskins calls ancestral recall. It operates as a bridge spanning spaces between the past, present, and future. Braiding is a tangible material thread connecting people separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of thousands of years. Almost 10,000 miles away from Yoruba land in Nigeria, there is a Colombian town named San Basilio de Palenque. Founded sometime in the dawn of the 16th century, the epic history of the Palenque is little known to the wider world. One of the numerous Palenques that once existed, San Basilio is the only one that remains today. It has a population of approximately 3,500 people and has been recognized since 2005 by UNESCO as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. Palenque hairstyles are rich with meaning, and some of them have been no less than life-saving. The founder of San Basilio de Palenque was a man named Benkos Bioho. He was a member of the royal family who ruled the islands off the coast of what is today Guinea-Bissau. In the 1590s, Bioho was captured by a Portuguese slave trader before being resold numerous times throughout the 1590s. But Bioho was emphatically not about that life. An early attempt at escape was cut short, but by 1599, our intrepid hero had escaped again, making his way into the marshy wetlands southeast of Cartagena in what is now Colombia. There, along with 10 others, he founded the Palenque, the first independent settlement in the entirety of the Americas. Even more remarkable is the fact that not only was it a free settlement, it was free and Black, having been founded and entirely populated by Africans. Bioho's army came to dominate all of the surrounding region, and the extensive intelligence network he created helped thousands of enslaved people escape and find refuge in the Palenque. One of the most remarkable tools of this intelligence network was the use of hair braiding. Hair was utilized as a form of mapping that was unintelligible to the Spanish. Braided maps worked as a type of underground railway, but the emphasis was on hiding in plain sight. Women would encode important messages into their hair patterns. It was a means of communication for the enslaved, enabling them to share plans and eventually make their way to liberation and freedom in the Palenque. For example, there's a hairstyle that there's a photograph of, and it's called the Mother, and it was this was described as an unequivocal sign that everything was planned. The women elaborated the hairstyle as a form of signal so that the escape could happen in blocks of 4 slaves. As a strategy, it was effective. The sheer volume of escapees to the Palenque presented a serious risk to Spanish rule. Moreover, Bioho used the title of king, posing a significant challenge to Spanish claims of authority, as well as to the myth of African inferiority on which the entire colonial enterprise was based. The impudence of a former slave who had rejected that reality and reinstated himself to his rightful position as king could not be tolerated. In 1605, desperate to prevent the loss of more slaves, but unable to defeat the Maroons, the Spanish offered a peace treaty. They promised to recognize the autonomy of the Palenque on the conditions that they stopped assisting escapees and they ceased referring to Bioho as king. The treaty was finalized in 1612. By 1619, the Spanish had reneged on it. They captured Bioho and he was hanged, drawn and quartered 2 years later on the 16th of March. The Spanish may have destroyed the body of its founder, but they couldn't kill his spirit of defiance, which remained strong in the Palenque, and the town flourished. And then throughout the Palenque history, hair braiding has remained an activity at the heart of its existence. And I just talk about kind of more hairstyles in that place and what they mean.
Extraordinary. Beautiful. Thank you very much, Emma. We're going to move over now. Karl Geary is an author, actor and director, and his brilliant first novel, Montpellier Parade, was selected as Book of the Year in 2017 in the Irish Times and the Times and was shortlisted for the Costa Novel Award. It is in essence a love story set in Dublin. First of all, Karl, how are you?
Well, certainly all the better for hearing Emma's reading. I don't know, how are any of us really? I'm fine, I suppose. I mean, I've chosen a life that sort of has isolation kind of drawn into it, and I'm used to that, or at least I thought I was until this. And I think, like most people, I'm realizing I really miss just small interactions, human interactions. Getting a cup of coffee, buying me bread, my milk, or meeting someone at a bus stop that I have never met. And these small exchanges that make us human. I'm starting to miss that. I don't want to live behind glass, and I don't want to ever feel that this is normal. I just wish we were all together today. I could, buy a copy of Emma's book and get her to sign it for me, and that would be terrific. It just feels like there's a slightly opaque gauze between me and the world, and I think that's common at the moment. So I don't love that. However, I also know I'm managing far better than, say, my friends who are involved in theatre, music, the technicians that support them, dancers, people who are kind of those conduits for bringing people together, community. I don't know what happens next for those guys. Maybe for writers, it might be a little easier, maybe not. So again, I'm not complaining. I'm fortunate, but I'm concerned.
Well,
if that makes sense.
That you mentioned strange boundaries that are in front of us at the moment. I mean, your book is essentially about boundaries and about the building of walls and indeed the crossing of those boundaries and those walls. Although it's fiction, is it any way reflective of your upbringing in Dublin?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's funny. I've been coy in the past, if I'm being honest, about finding that line between my own life and fiction. And part of that is to protect the fiction. Like, to my mind, fiction is less concerned with what happened, the facts of what happened. And you see that when you reread a book. You don't reread it. You already know what happened when you reread a book. But you're looking to experience something in the language, in the atmosphere, the tone, the texture, and storytelling, that tradition of storytelling. But in terms of, I suppose, this book came out 2 years ago, and so I suppose I have a little bit of distance from it, and I can probably be more frank about where it comes from in some ways. But certainly, I grew up in Dublin in the 70s and 80s. As Emma said, it was a very different place. I don't think the boundaries that I was faced with have gone anywhere. I think they've become more sophisticated. They've gentrified. They've become glassier and more polished, maybe. But I did think about it. There's a chapter in the book where the protagonist Sonny goes into the National Gallery, goes into a museum for the first time on his own. And it's really an act of rebellion in some ways for a working class person to do that, even though there's no signs out front to say, you're not allowed in here. The signs are everywhere. And it starts much earlier than that. Sonny, the protagonist in the novel, he suffers from the guilt of a broken home, from the shame of scarcity. And I think one of the great sleights of hand in the world today is the suggestion that these things, any scarcity is a reflection on the individual and not on the structure that created that scarcity. So the 80s was a great time for that. We watched Thatcher, her destruction of the miners, and there was this kind of glossy sense for the first time that I witnessed, at least, where if you didn't have these new shiny toys that we have, that was a reflection on you. And what they would do, which I always thought was rather sinister, is they'd pluck people from areas of society, one or two, not too many. Somebody from a different ethnic minority, someone from a different gender, someone from a different class, and they would be almost used to beat the people left behind with their success because they did it. Why can't you? But I've probably gone a little far with that. But I think it actually relates to what James Connolly was probably talking about over 100 years ago. This idea that if British rule, for example, ends tomorrow, but you keep the structure in place, the financial class are kept in place. Oh, thank you.
It's like one of my favorite quotes from James Connolly.
Isn't it fantastic? It is, because what he said was, all you've done is change the colours on the flag. And right? And in a lesser way, for me, so... And it's interesting when Emma was talking about going to America or going to the UK. So for me, I moved to America when I was 16 and I was essentially an economic migrant. But as soon as I got there, I went from being a working class kid to being a white English speaking European, and I could assimilate into that society. So it's interesting. So there's blocks everywhere, but not everyone has the same blocks. And I think it's fascinating. I'm also really impressed with the next generation beneath me, like the younger people coming up the ranks. They're talking about stuff that took me years to figure out. And they seem to have access to it. Isn't that right? Do you agree with that? There's kind of this sense that maybe capitalism isn't the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And these ideas that, kind of would have just been like fringe, or people that were like just very radical, have become a lot more mainstream in many ways.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it was a hard-won fight as well, because when you go up against that machine and start speaking that kind of, those sentences, that truth, you'll be ground to dust by that machine. It's a ferocious thing. So I'm assuming that what's nice about this is that the years and years of people being ground to dust has maybe slowed the machine enough that these voices can be heard.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with my book, but yes.
I have to say, back to your book. I mean, it's beautifully written in this poetic, meditative style. It's had this strange, you capture a quality of memory in there that's just extraordinary. I mean, sometimes while reading it, I sometimes felt like I was living in it. But it's also written in the second person to superb effect. Was it always going to be in the second person, or can you tell us a little bit about your writing process on the book?
Well, thank you. It wasn't. It was. I think it was always going to be second person. I was very reluctant to use second person because it's annoying. When somebody keeps, poking at you and going you in a book, it can be infuriating. I think it can work very well in short stories, but in long form prose, it can be a little difficult to sustain. And I really wanted it to be omnipresent, to be third person. But what I realized in going back to it again and again, that it wasn't essentially a second person in that traditional sense. It wasn't you, the reader. The you was really a finger pointed back to the protagonist. The you is an accusation. It's you didn't do this. And so in some ways, it's a protagonist who hasn't come to terms with their own story. Because in order to do that, in order to use I, for example, there has to be a certain amount of confidence and space provided in order to understand and absorb and maybe be, in a post-traumatic way, able to understand one's own journey. And Sonny is not at that place. And so that you is really an accusation of the faults that he has internalized, I suppose, in some ways. And also with that separation, there's actually this kind of, what I wanted and what I think happens is that there's an intimacy that starts to be produced that I really wanted, because I wanted to be close to him in a way that at times feels uncomfortable.
You're an actor and a screenwriter also for Coney Island Baby, and adapted Dorothy Parker's You Were Perfectly Fine. And there's certainly a cinematic quality in Montpellier Parade. Was that something you were conscious of as you wrote? I suppose I refer specifically, I'm thinking of the way you use focus in conversations, the conversations with Sonny's mum, where she's in sharp focus and the brothers are way in the background. It actually stylistically reminded me of the film work of Laszlo Nemes, where some things are very, very sharp and some things are blurred in the back. Were you conscious of a cinematic quality? Was that deliberate?
Well, it's deliberate in that it's kind of built into my DNA at this point. Not because of my own work or in around films, but because of the influence they had growing up. I was kind of wayward, and I would bunk off school, and along the quays there, they used to run a double bill, and I would go in there and lose the day, which was terrific, actually. But what I loved about cinema was its accessibility to somebody like me, whereas theatre seemed off bounds. It seemed like, it was certainly the price tag was a lot higher, and it was too far away. And what I loved again about cinema was you could hide in the back seats. You were in the dark and you could witness, and that was great. But it wasn't, in terms of the book and the brothers and who's in focus and who's not in focus, with those specifically, what I had in mind was that there was something almost clannish about their existence, that they were the community that Sonny was choosing to be with or against. And I think I was thinking of it more in terms of mythology, in terms of like the hero's journey, that idea that if Sonny goes into the underworld and gains whatever that prize is, usually knowledge, usually the story ends there, but actually it continues on to when he comes back out and he brings this thing to the family, to the community, and very often they'll kill you. That's the deal. They do not necessarily want to hear the new information you have. And I think for Sonny, that idea that, you know, he's seen this other life, this other world of possibilities, that he's looked over that, whatever that wall is, and he can't have both. And so the brothers are sort of that feeling, that sense of foreboding, I suppose, in some ways. I don't know if that's clear or not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Karl, I know you have some readings prepared for us today, so your first one.
Yeah, so I was going to, it's just very, very quickly. So Sonny has never really, he's been breaking into this girl, this woman who's in love with's house. She's in hospital, and he's been stealing her books. And he takes this notion that he's going to bring one of them back into his own house. And this is very quick. Here's the book. You had never had a book before, and this was a good one. You were sure of that, with its thumb-worn pages and old amber spell. The writer's name in bold print, T.S. Eliot, and a simple word poems along the top. On the cover, cutting through the word, was a perfect circle, a dark stain. You saw her then, Vera, at home one night on the blue couch, a blanket over her knees, maybe a fire burning in the grate. She looped a strand of hair behind her ear and reached across and set a half-finished glass of red wine onto the book she had fully emptied. It left a mark. You sat in your kitchen table and boldly put the book out in front of you. Your mother was making the dinner, the news and the radio. The boys were in the next room, the television too. When you came home, your mother had resisted asking you how much you'd been paid, but she wanted to know. She was angry at you for making her ask. What's that, she says. It's a book. I can see it's a book. What book is it? Poems, you say. Poems? She forced air through her pursed lips, making a kind of pap sound. What sort of poems? Just poems. Where did you get it? From her. Who? Your woman I was working for. She gave it, yes. What's she doing giving a book? Don't know. Of course you know. She gave it, didn't she? She came over and picked up the book, turning the pages over in her hand. What's her name? Vera, you say. Bloody Vera. Vera what? Hatton, I think. She's Protestant, so I don't know. She can be what she wants as long as you're paid. Did she pay it? Yeah, of course. How much? How much did she pay it? She's paying me next week. I fucking knew it, you sick. She didn't pay you. Tell the truth. She's going to pay me next week. Give me back the book. She walked the book into the sitting room and held it for your brothers to see. Look, she says, he does a day's work and she gives him a book. She came back to the kitchen but wouldn't surrender it. She flicked through the pages, searching. I'd like to know what she thinks she's doing, giving books to young fellas. Cheek of her. How old is she? I said, what age? I don't know. Well, I do. She's laughing at you, so she is. Laughing her bloody head off. Jesus Christ, a book. She threw the book onto the table. It slid across the surface, falling over the edge to the floor when it made a flat plop sound. The stain on the cover facing up. It was an ordinary stain, like the book was somehow broken, no longer special.
Beauty. Thank you. Just throw this out to both of you. It's something that popped up earlier in the week in other conversations with Vagabonds, but it's I suppose aware of the fact that we are going out on social media, and social media as a form of connection, but also as a delivery system, yes, not only for news media, but directly from news itself. I know, Emma, you're a queen of social media. What do you think about that? I mean, how do you think it's as in the way we deliver information at the moment?
Speaking to particularly the pandemic, or more generally
The pandemic,
last few years,
and generally over the last few years.
Wow. Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like social media is something of a. I can't even. Okay, like, to use a cliche, a double-edged sword. I think its power for connection. I think how isolated I was when I was younger, and how, people of similarly kind of minoritized positions can now find others like them, can find many others like them through the connections that are facilitated by social media. In terms of also allowing voices that would otherwise not have been, people that wouldn't have been, have had the right connections and the right networks, have been, obviously there's still issues with publishing, big issues with publishing and with media, and there being kind of more diversity in terms of the types of people who get opportunities. But with that being said, I think a lot of examples that we've seen of kind of more diverse representation have come through social media, from people just being able to kind of circumvent some of the traditional routes and put their ideas, their writing, their material out there, and that generate like a following and an interest. And then more traditional media like seeing, oh look, there's an interest in this, or coming to the attention of like certain gatekeepers that you just wouldn't have been able to access before. I think it's been quite liberatory in those ways. But I think like we live in kind of these times are unprecedented in many ways, but I think one of the ways that they are most unlike other times is the level, like these are incredibly divided times, and people operate in these very kind of atomized groups often, and I think a lot of that has also been facilitated by social media. I think the right has been incredibly successful, like if you think about the culture wars, in like kind of weaponizing some of this and really allowing divisions that exist and that are played out online, on weaponizing them, and kind of manipulating and inflaming them further, and has been far more, I guess, successful at using that to consolidate power, while the left is often kind of, floundering in the narcissism of small differences. People kind of people who should be allies, naturally allies, tearing each other apart over often quite inconsequential differences, while the right consolidates power. So a double-edged sword, different forces at play simultaneously. Another thing I find, just briefly, that I find a point of concern, and I think it's different in different kind of countries and cultures, but certainly I feel like in the UK, some of the okay, so it's exciting, that some of these ideas that previously were quite radical or fringe have become more mainstream, but within that you see them being often commodified and absorbed into the status quo, and actually used to, in many ways, strengthen the status quo rather than shift it. And there's a lot of people who use the language of liberation, who use the language of radical politics, but they are just liberals, or they're capitalists, and they use this very like radical language to mask what it is that they're really doing. So I think that's also something I'm painfully aware of.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add. I mean, I agree with Emma completely. And I think one of the great and terrible pinnacles I think of what Emma's talking about are, in November, Americans are being asked to choose between neo-fascism and neoliberalism. In the worst way, and I think you're right. I think we're fully immersed in the spectacle. Everything is absorbed, and I think we see that very much. Like, we just had Gay Pride Day, and they're selling it in supermarkets, and things have so quickly absorbed and commercialized. And I see it with younger people, my own kids, how they're really just items to be harvested for data and sold back and reflected back to them. Whatever shortcomings they believe they have, suddenly there's some sort of thing that can be sold to them to amend that. And I think that's very troubling. I also think the bubble of online, and I'm terrible online actually, but I do see it, and I see it for myself. Over my weird lefty politics, I realized that I'm a bubble. I've seen that in the last couple of elections in different countries. You assume that you are like-minded, and there's a majority, you would hope, or I would hope, and then that hasn't proved true at all. So it's really, and again, for me, I can navigate the world without these things. I kind of straddle both worlds, that technology and the current technology, but I do feel, it's interesting. I think younger generations, they're so brutalized. They're set up as these spoiled cell phone touting thing, and when the reality of that is, these people have seen one of the worst recessions in 2008. They're going to see a tsunami of austerity coming at us. The eco-structure, they will never own a home. All of these things are true. The price of college education, all of these things that they have to absorb, and they're called a snowflake generation. It's absurd to me, so I don't know if that's, I can't even remember what the question was, but I should leave it there and I'll get off my voice.
But Don't Touch My Hair has opened up a dialogue about how history is regarded and how we perceive identity and how we look at ourselves physically. What I did want to ask you about, Disobedient Bodies is another project that you've described as a virtual space, a book club for radical ideas, unconventional thoughts. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So Disobedient Bodies is a project that I started during the pandemic. When I thought I was going to have a little bit more free time. That has proven to be far from the truth. But at that stage, I couldn't foresee what would unfold. So honestly, it started with me posting a photograph of me in my underwear with my post-pregnancy physique, shall we say. And I was thinking about ideas that are in the book about sorry, my mind has just kind of gone blank, but ideas around punitive ideas around the body and kind of disciplining the body. And certainly when I was growing up, the beauty ideal was just to be as kind of physically non-existent as possible, apart from having big boobs. That was the only place there could be any kind of concentration of fat. But everything else just needed to, be starved away. And that deeply affected me and my perception of myself and my eating habits. And so I posted this picture just kind of thinking about where I was now, which is so far from that, and just linking it to some of these ideas about why the fixation on thinness and women starving themselves is like what that says about societies and about like kind of female obedience. And that was very well responded to. And that post was very well responded to. And in the way that I used hair in the book, I know that some of the things that I'm interested in, some of the kind of more radical texts that I draw on, the ideas that interest me are not always immediately like appealing to wider audiences. But if I kind of marry some of those ideas with, in the book I use hair. Some people have described the Don't Touch My Hair as kind of something of a Trojan horse, because you think it's going to be about one thing, and it is about that, but then there's lots of unexpected stuff in there as well. So I thought through Disobedient Bodies, I could look at bodies and like body positivity and stuff, because that's the kind of language that's very, you know, popular online and on social media and stuff, and something that is important. But also I could use it as a space to think about like disobedient, like, so I think it's disobedient bodies and the ideas that animate them, you know, so that I can also think about kind of like unconventional and radical ways of thinking and viewing the world, and some more I guess not obscure texts, but there's a lot of like there's a philosopher called Fred Moten who wrote a book called The Undercommons, Black Fugitive Study and Black Planning. If I try and do a reading group around that initially, it's probably going to be, you know, not as appealing to so many people. But once you can kind of smuggle some of these ideas in. I shouldn't give away I shouldn't be giving away my methods.
No, I love it. Emma, I know you have a second reading for us. What are you going to read for us now?
Okay, let me maybe read some of that stuff about the body then, because that will relate to what we've just been talking about. So in the Black is Beautiful movement, the emphasis on achieving and possessing beauty fell as ever disproportionately on women. Black is beautiful did nothing to displace the oppressive notion that Black women had a special duty to their race to be beautiful. Moreover, it defined beauty by conforming to a narrow standard. It also stated that you couldn't be down for the cause if you didn't dress for the part, a type of thinking that is misleading in its attention to style, potentially at the cost of substance. On the subject of Black is Beautiful, Toni Morrison asks from whom such validation is being sought, before eventually surmising that it is validation from the white gaze. But Morrison doesn't need to be told she is beautiful or to be told that Black is beautiful. She knows that it is. The concept of validation from the white gaze resonates deeply. I am reminded of all the times I was told that I was pretty for a Black girl, or that I was lucky I was pretty because I could get away with being Black, that perceived beauty was the price I had to pay for the burden of Blackness. My worth as a human being was not recognized because of my race, but apparently the possession of beauty could compensate for my racial inadequacy. I'm grateful for the different cultures I've lived in and the different positions I have occupied on the spectrum of beauty. In certain times and places, beautiful, in others, not. And I saw the difference in treatment based on whether or not I was judged as possessing this thing called beauty. I understood then that beauty was not the space for my salvation. It is far too fragile, and my worth as a human being cannot be given or withheld based on something so arbitrary. Yet so much of our identity is invested within the beauty regime. It occupies a huge percentage of our thoughts and social interactions. When we are perceived to possess it, it provides us with a fleetingly enjoyable feeling. Thus, we interpret beauty as a benevolent, positive force within our lives. And sometimes in our fight for inclusion and equality, we forget that achieving the position we are fighting for might become something of a Pyrrhic victory. In our desire to see our own beauty acknowledged, we forget that the beauty regime is an oppressive construct designed to keep women in a state of heightened insecurity. This doesn't stop at the white gaze. The idea of the very gaze itself is Eurocentric, and its origins are implicitly white and implicitly patriarchal. Black is beautiful doesn't solve the problem of competitive beauty, nor does it operate outside of the paradigm created by Eurocentric values. It operates on terrain already mapped out by the symbolic codes of the dominant white culture. Just one more paragraph. Of course, today, Black people have their own oppressive beauty standards. Lighter skin and good hair might be the most pertinent, and there can be huge pressure to conform to these. But generally, in African cultures, the African cultures I refer to in the book, beauty was not as standardized. And as a result, these standards remain to an extent comparatively forgiving. Certainly, they are often positively encouraging of a little wiggle and jiggle. Take Oshun, the Yoruba goddess of beauty and fertility. Lines from her praise songs describe her as a corpulent woman who cannot be embraced around the waist. I can't think of a beauty ideal further from the purge and punishment food culture that I grew up with in Ireland. As Naomi Wolf explains, a culture fixated on female thinness is not an obsession about female beauty, but an obsession about female obedience. Dieting is the most potent political sedative in women's history. A quietly mad population is a tractable one. The difference exists as a powerful challenge to the tired narrative of Black and African women as oppressed in relation to liberated white Westerners. Stop there.
Beauty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Karl, you adapted Dorothy Parker's You Were Perfectly Fine for the screen as a short film, and I know the process in bringing something from page to screen is essentially kind of like changing language. Could you describe your process for us, please?
Yeah, it's really, I just finished doing with this book. I just spent a couple of months doing an adaptation, and I think it's related to the contract that a reader and an author have. With prose, with novels, or the reader has to it's an active thing. The reader kind of has to meet you halfway, and they have to engage with you in their imagination, whereas cinema is more static. People, they just observe, they watch, and it kind of washes over them. And so the things that happen or go on in a novel, there's no easy translation. They're not the same language. There's a visual language and there's our language, that, and even within that, there's subdivisions, isn't there? But I think that what was it I was going to say now? I've lost my trail. With a screenplay, sorry. With a screenplay, it's a manual, essentially. It's raising some sort of scaffolding that these images are going to be attached to. And a film is made in three different points. It's written, it's shot, and it's edited. And each one of those departments, kind of sets another coat of skim over the top of that. So, whereas with prose, and what I miss, I'm going back to prose this week, and I really missed it. I missed the freedom of it, the ability to go anywhere, to just travel without any constraints, and it's a great deal more satisfying, I think. I know that's not what you asked me, but I'm just throwing that in there.
I was going to ask, is there another novel in the pipeline? I've finished a second book. I'm an excruciatingly slow writer. It's terrible. I throw away far more than I keep. There was a quote that I like a lot. James Joyce, when he was finished writing, I think it was Dubliners, was asked about his process, and he said that he wanted the language to have this kind of scrupulous meanness, which I think is a brilliant phrase anyway. And the thought was that the language itself should be lean, but that it's not
it's not overly emotive, I suppose. It has just the right amount on it, and it's a really hard balance to strike. Because if you cut the thing back too far, you lose what's beautiful, particularly when you're dealing with work that talks about things that are not beautiful. That if you go it becomes too sharp, if that makes sense. And so I'm interested in language. I'm interested in how much is enough, how much is too much. So I can't remember what you asked me, but that's where I'm at with book. I finished. Actually, I'm terrified, really, because I finished everything I need to finish, and I don't have anything going forward, and it's just I'm petrified. You know.
Karl, I know you have another reading prepared for us today, so in your own time.
Very, very quickly. It's so here we have Sonny and Vera together. Sonny's discovered Vera's other to Sonny. She's perpetually other and absolutely separate from his life. Different through, age, class, culture, nationality. These people couldn't be more separate. And also, they don't have a natural language. They're bookends in some ways, in that Sonny's figuring out the way society operates, and she's on her way out of that same society. She's on her way out of the world. And this takes place just after Sonny has saved her from an attempted suicide. And so, in some ways, at this point, he's been drawn into her secret, into her universe. So he comes to visit her in hospital. For the second time. There's a train goes by overhead here. I'm in a studio in Glasgow, and I apologise to your sound man. Have you come to read to me, says Vera. If you like, if you have a book, he says. The heavy door closing behind you. The lights were off in the smoking room, and I'm just going to start that again. I'm sorry. I forgot to take my glasses off, and I actually can't see the page. Have you come to read to me, says Vera. If you like, if you have a book, you say. The heavy door closing behind you. The lights were off in the smoking room, and Vera was an L-shaped silhouette in a green chair, catching none of the creeping street light from the large window. You had walked first past her empty house, too frightened to go inside, then continuing along the road until you reached a hospital. You waited outside, watching through the plate glass for the matron to move away from a post. Then you came along the dim corridor and up the stairs, passing occasional late-night visitors, coming to and from the intensive care unit, murmurs of difficult conversations echoing off the sterile walls and floors. From the doorway of her ward, you had seen that Vera's unmade bed was empty, the sheets and pink blanket in a great mound at the base. I couldn't sleep, you say, and walked over and sat down next to her. Are you here to see me, or is there someone else you're visiting? You. I'm here to see you. What would you have done if I was asleep? I don't know. Waited, woken you. She smiled and passed you a pack of smokes in her hand. Do you know what I'd love, she says. Toast, with real butter and marmalade, decent coffee. She'd not put her slippers on, her toe closest to you. She had a scrape of red nail varnish. There's a farter in my ward. I've not located her, but she's there, farting. You laughed, and she seemed to like that. There's another woman about my age. She has these awful little snot-nosed children to pile around her every day. I don't think she's sick. She's on sabbatical. When she leaves, when they leave, she takes out a magazine and visibly relaxes. Have you children, you say? But she didn't like that. A long ash toppled from the end of her cigarette and fell unnoticed. Are your feet cold, you say? No. What's your story, Sonny? Don't know. Have you a crush on me or something? You looked away and felt your face flush. There's no need to be coquettish about it. I don't know what that means. It means you need to read more. Not too old for you, no? She looked at you then, and you were brave and held her stare. No, you say. I suppose if that's what works for you. What's with the red wine? Who's that for? Me. Just you. Yeah. It's a bit flowery for your neck of the woods, no? My neck of the woods. Look, if you're going to pretend to be stupid, I'm going to find another friend. Yes, your neck of the woods, the neck of the woods where teenage lads don't drink red wine. As she lit another cigarette, small flame illuminated her face. You watched her hands fall around the flame and her mouth press forward. Why did you move to Ireland? I like the rain. You must fucking love it so. Who cares, Sonny? I mean, really, it's a story. I do, you say. Well, good, you make one up and we'll both believe it. You were lost then. You really had no idea how to speak with her. If it were Sharon, you'd have just pushed her and she'd have pushed you back, and that would be that. But you sat in the dark room in the silence and smoked, and you were glad to know that you had the duration of time a fresh lit smoke gave you, each puff falling like pink sand from an hourglass. The silence between you was enough. You watched her secretly at first, and then allowed your stare openly here and there, as you pleased. And she showed no sign of discomfort. She was beautiful, your Vera, and perhaps was used to being watched. She turned then and caught your eye on purpose and held it like a vice, like an inspection. Your eyes and nose and mouth and chin. You're too young to be lonely. Where are your friends, she says. Where are yours? She continued to watch you and might have said something, but her attention was turned to the sound of quick footsteps from the corridor. They stopped, and at once the door was pushed open. And actually, I'll leave it there. It's fine. Enough of that.
Thank you, Karl. Something that, listening to you both speak here, and something that's occurred to my head. We're in the library of the Yeats building, Sligo. I gave a talk here last year about Yeats and the supernatural and the occult and magic and all of the above. But a broad definition of magic is the manipulation of symbols to produce a change in consciousness. So in that way, technically speaking, you are both magicians. So I'll leave you with that. Emma Dabiri, Karl Geary, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for giving of your time. Much appreciated. A really heartfelt thanks. Cairde Connected runs until July 11th. All events, full details of all events are available at cairdefestival.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
both.
so much.
And congratulations, Likewise. Emma. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you.